We're going to continue our discussions here at the 2024 INCOMPAS Show with what's new in robocall mitigation and call delivery. This is an exciting panel for me. This is an area that I get to work on a near daily basis. And I'm really excited to showcase some of the products and solutions that our members are putting into the ecosystem. We're going to have some conversation about some developments in robocall mitigation. But it's been an interesting year. Yeah, please, by all means, film
forward, guys.
Front.
Don't be shy.
Yeah.
Storm the stage.
I don't have a t-shirt cannon. That was a lie. But it's been a really interesting year, and on a regulatory basis, I think it's probably been a slightly slower year than the 4 or 5 that preceded it, obviously with the passing of the Trace Act and the several dozen proceedings that followed it. So it gives us an opportunity to, I think, highlight what you all are doing in the space. I'm so grateful that you all are here. Why don't I give each of our panelists an opportunity to introduce themselves, and then we'll talk more specifically about why you're here and what products and solutions it is that you've been putting out into the world. So, Gerry?
I'll keep it brief. Gerry Christensen, I'm the head of regulatory compliance for Caller ID Reputation.
I'm Gentry. I'm corporate counsel for Microsoft. I am on our telecom regulatory team, so we handle all of Microsoft's telecom compliance worldwide.
Hey, good morning. John Haraburda from Transaction Network Services. I'm responsible for the Call Guardian product suite that is the industry leader in robocall mitigation, reporting, alerting, call validation, and treatment, and that experience for the consumer.
And Nick Reifschneider, Vice President of Product at Sinch.
Excellent. Excellent. I love having a cheering grenade. That's exactly what we need.
I packed the room for you. We're good.
John, I'm going to start with you. Appreciate you coming back for the 2024 INCOMPAS Show. You were here. You were there at the 2024 Policy Summit in Washington, D.C. Gave a great presentation, but on Call Guardian. So I wanted to give you another opportunity for those that weren't at the Policy Summit to talk a little bit about that. You are at the forefront of efforts to mitigate illegal robocalls by enhancing subscriber security. Tell us a little bit more about Call Guardian and about the work the TNS is doing to mitigate fraudulent communications.
Excellent. Thanks, Chris. Really appreciate the opportunity. So, as we talked about last time, real focus of what Call Guardian is doing is really helping to ensure that consumer experience on the handset and to bring the ability of brands and enterprises to communicate with those consumers, to make the connection, make the phone call, and have the call complete. So as part of the mechanisms that we perform in Call Guardian, we use a myriad of services, algorithms, features, and packages to analyze traffic, anything from the normal activity patterns to having honeypot collections of what's actually being said on the call, to having information about what is the call action behavior with the consumer. Are they picking up the call? Are they answering the call? Are they having a long conversation or short conversation? So these are all pieces that are put into the algorithm to analyze it. And I think the most important piece of it, and we kind of alluded to in the pre-call discussion, is what Call Guardian really works on, and this is what TNS does in general, is gives power to the consumer to let them manage how they want to experience the solution. So between Call Guardian as the call validation and treatment, Call Filter, which is our application service that runs on the handset that manages that customer experience and provides the ability of providing feedback and interface and information sharing to and from the consumer of what activity is happening on their phone and giving them the ability to provide insight back to guide how the future traffic should be seen. And when you look at this with other products we have, right, so we think about some of the aggregated services that we have of connecting our customers together. So Call Guardian is a service managed by over 150 service providers in US and Canada. So that's a great population of customers who can share traffic between themselves and provide a more trusted ecosystem of having this network communication.
Yeah.
And then we have the extension of number management and enterprise-branded calling to, again, ensure that experience, give the consumer that trusted communication, that trusted brand presentation to really ensure that full package of the experience.
Yeah, that was going to be, this is where I was going to zag a little bit.
Fire away,
because we were going to talk, I mean, we talked at the Policy Summit about the work that TNS does on analytics and how in-depth those analytics go. You walked us through a little bit of how some of that works. But I noticed noticed as I was reading the INCOMPAS Show Daily put together by Gail Norris. Gail, raise your hand. There she is. Gail put together today's show daily, and I was reading on page 6, you can find it in page 6, that TNS, TransUnion, and First Orion launched branded calling with logos for enterprises. And obviously, trying to, whether it's, rich call data, and providing the consumer with more information about who is calling is intended to be, a mitigation technique to ensure that the consumer has trust in that the call that's coming is in fact the person that is represented in the call. So wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about launching this new endeavor rather than just have you come back and talk about call analytics again. Tell us a little bit more about the work you all are doing on branded calling.
Yeah, I think it's really quite significant of what TNS has been leading in the industry. What we've been working on is this enablement of the vetting of an enterprise, the collection of the necessary information, and then creating the ecosystem environment to allow that to be shared from beginning to end of the call. The mechanism is, again, for the consumer's benefit. The intention is you share the information with the consumer that gives them the best information to know whether to accept the call or not. So one of the use cases I've used in the past in a prior life is Marriott Hotels or the Sheraton today. If I get a call from the Sheraton in Denver, I'm going to be likely to pick that call up. If I get a call from Marriott Vacation Properties, I may not be as inclined to pick it up, but there's no difference in value of the presentation of the branding and name information that you express in a Marriott rewards ceremony or a vacation property or a legitimate hotel. And so the idea is that by presenting the information to the consumer, it gives them the power and the ability to either accept or reject, and then it gives the brand the ability to actually physically connect to the consumer. Because again, as we talked about at the Policy Summit, the vast majority of traffic that is labeled by analytics engines like TNS are actually delivered to the subscriber. And there is the ability of that brand to communicate, leave a voicemail message, and actually make that connection. So if you have that and you enable that, as we talked about earlier, that's part of what we look at in the analytics to provide some levels of trust of that traffic. And then to the consumer, having a legitimate voicemail left reinforces the positive nature of that originating party to allow that communication and that experience and partnership between the brand and the consumer to be extended all via the service provider that's enabling that communication path.
Interesting. Well, congratulations on the. And is this something you all are just launching at the show, or?
No. So one of the pieces that's kind of intriguing in it is the ability of cross-populating this information across different service providers. So one of the biggest expressions that we've had in the past in comments has been, okay, great, you have it on carrier A, but there's 2 other of the big 3 mobile providers. Well, this now enables that ubiquitous presentation across the different service providers. So it's the identical experiences for consumers on an AT&T, a T-Mobile, and a Verizon Wireless environment. So that's a very significant uplift. And again, it's a partnership that TNS is leading in the industry and bringing the parties together to really help the ecosystem out and build the right environment.
Great. Gerry, you and I did a INCOMPAS webinar earlier this year talking about caller ID reputation. Caller ID reputation focused on B2C communications, business to customer, and addressing the challenges that enterprises have in sort of reaching their constituencies. Walk us through how caller ID reputation gives its business customers more visibility into what happens, when they make calls, and is there a greater recognition about the challenges associated with visibility? Tell us a little bit more about caller ID reputation.
Yeah, of course, and it's a good segue for me to go right after John, because we feel that we're very complementary to the analytics engines, TNS and Haya and First Orion, for example. And the reason I say that is because what we do with our business customers is we have them register their telephone numbers with us. And we do KYC on them because we want to make sure we trust them.
Yeah.
Know your customer. We want to make sure that we know them well and we trust them. Vice versa, we are SOC 2 Type 2 compliant, so they can trust us. And if you're not familiar with SOC 2 Type 2, what that basically means is we go through a lot of rigor to make sure that we take care of data and keep it secure and so on and so forth. The reason we have them register with us is because we do monitoring, management, and remediation. And so we really applaud the efforts of the analytics engines, many of which also do branded calling, like TNS, like John was saying, because I agree, and I would go so far as to say that branded calling is kind of the future for enterprises that want to get their brand out there and all the things that John's saying. At the same time, where we're at right now is not everybody's doing branded calling.
Right.
And in fact, there's an argument to be made that even for some branded calling, like third-party debt collection, they'll probably have lower call completion because no one wants to answer a call from a debt collector. First party, maybe. Like if I haven't paid my utility bill, I'll answer that. But third party is another matter.
Right.
So what we do is we have calls that are placed so that we can have visibility in terms of what's actually happening with those calls. Does it come across as normal, or does it have perhaps a spam flag or something like that? Oftentimes, that spam flag is deserved because maybe it really is spam. You know, one of the things the analytics engines look at is crowdsourced feedback. And so what we do is we go through a bit of triage. We see, based on data that we get from various sources, including the analytics engines, some of them are OTT-based, as well as honeypots, we go through triage and we look and we see, is there anything that's indicative of fraud, including FTC complaints? Next thing we look at is there anything unlawful, like an FTC TSR violation, telemarketing and sales rule, or perhaps a TCPA violation? Absent those two things, what we do with our remediation is we actually have a conversation with the analytics engines. And the way that conversation pretty much goes is, okay, we've done our diligence. Can you please take a look at this and see, is there any reason why there's a flag on there? And again, it doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to be removed immediately. Maybe the flag is deserved. But often we have enough cases where it is removed so that we can advocate on behalf of a legitimate business, and that's the important thing. Legitimate business that's not doing anything unlawful, and then we get that fixed. So that's why I see it as very complementary.
Yeah. You know, I said in my introduction, I said that it's been a slightly slower year. One area where the Commission has acted is with respect to consumer consent, with receiving communications. And next year, newly adopted FCC rules making it simpler for consumers to revoke consent to unwanted robocalls and robotexts will sort of go into effect. I'm wondering, Gerry, you know, how is that going to impact the work that you're doing and your customers, and what challenges do you sort of foresee as a result of Commission action there?
Well, first of all, from my perspective, I think it's been a pretty heavy year, to be honest. I guess it depends on your point of view. But with respect to consent, there's actually two things. There's that one that occurred, and then the one that went into the Federal Registry in January, which is going to take effect next January, which is the one-to-one express written consent,
right.
which is also another big consent issue. But regarding revocation, basically, they changed the rules from being relatively wide open to 10 days. And what that means is when revocation occurs, the business must, within 10 days, stop calling. So this is their internal DNC, their internal do not call list. So if I say I don't want to hear from Microsoft anymore, and that might be a text message, by the way. If I say STOP, Microsoft better not contact me anymore within that 10-day period. So that's a big deal. And the other thing is they put together some specific terminology. STOP, I mentioned, is one of them. There's like a handful of others. I can't remember them sitting here right now. But the bottom line is to be much more responsive to consumers, making them aware of this is a really important thing, by the way, consumer awareness, that they can do this. Because actually one of the biggest things that comes up with consent is people that have consented don't remember that they've actually opted in, and then they complain. As a matter of fact, John and I were talking about that before we came on stage, which is why crowdsourced feedback is important. So I predict that 2025 is going to be a big year with respect to investigation and maybe even some lawsuits regarding consent,
right, because
because of the other rule that's taking place in January that says if you're a telemarketer, you better be very, very careful with your list that you actually have the proper opt-in. And by the way, from a call treatment perspective, that's something that we don't see. We don't see it in honeypots, consent that is. You don't see that in a SIP message, whether there's consent.
Right.
In a perfect world, from a UI perspective, it'd be great if there was some other check mark, like a purple check mark or whatever, so I could see, oh, I do have consent. I don't remember giving Microsoft consent, but this is a consented call. That's not there, but maybe someday it will be.
Yeah. I'm not sure if any of the other panelists wanted to walk through that. John, TNS thinking about the revocation issue at all?
We are. So part of what we look at is really the validating that originating source. We do have some validation and verification methodology incorporated within enterprise branded calling that does that validation check to say, is this call actually coming from this originating party at the point of call, terminating at the terminating network, and validating that. That's more of the authentication of the event itself, but not necessarily the URL or the agreement to allow that brand to call. The expression of that and rolling back is usually handled in the redress process. So as Gerry mentioned, right, so part of the mechanism that exists is we have several websites, right? We have free caller registry, we've got a report a robocall, we have branded websites for many of our larger customers that we manage and offer. And in those workflows, there's the ability of submitting information to say, hey, I'm a legitimate brand of Microsoft. I am calling people using these numbers and I'm a legitimate originator. Great, we take that and bring that in and that's part of the algorithm. We do have others that come says, hey, I've been getting my calls marked spam. I think I'm wrong. As Gerry mentioned, right, they'll come in, they'll work through our redress process and support teams and go through their analysis of doing their due diligence. Part of that is going back to the enterprise and validating, are you calling these people? Do you have the ULAs in place? And the like as well. Additionally, with some of the services like we have for telephone number reputation management, same mechanism. We've got basically the enterprise signs up for the service. Part of the service is them registering their number, but it's also the notification to that enterprise directly when we start seeing the algorithm and the scoring of that traffic starting to decline or showing some issues or concerns. So part of that is a proactive reach out to the enterprise, again, like you mentioned, right, to confirm that EULA agreement. Are they following practices? Are they calling at 9 p.m. at night? Are they having too many phone calls, et cetera, right? And then making sure that they follow those compliances. And I think in that policy summit, right, we shared the best practices for call originations that I think you shared with a larger audience. So those kind of things are what we look at and use in this whole process, because it is a back and forth, right? And there is an ebb and flow, and there are customers that are signed up for service. We see them go to a, I'll call it a non-compliant type of activity. We contact them and they adjust and they normalize, and then everything settles down. So it's part of a natural self-cleaning process that really fits in well with the mechanism.
Talked a little bit about Sinch. You all maintain a number of solutions, platforms for your customers, in sort of meeting their messaging and voice service needs. Walk us through some of those solutions, but then also tell us how you're kind of adjusting them, I think, to meet industry and regulatory mitigation efforts.
Sure. So Sinch is a global company that offers voice, messaging, email, verification, hosted platform services throughout the world. And my focus here is in the U.S. on our voice and our UCaaS messaging services. And so we spend a lot of time trying to figure out how can we work with our service providers, the enterprises that are on our network, also the carriers behind us, because they're all our customers, because we're the most interconnected company really in the US. And so we try to find how can customers deliver those calls and those messages to our carriers as efficiently as possible, while also protecting those carriers from unwanted illegal robocalls. So we spend a lot of time talking about that. We implement multiple solutions on the voice side, whether it's a DNO service. Our customers can DNO their own telephone numbers. We utilize TNSI's services, their analytics services as well, to help find and route out illegal robocalls. I think probably the thing that we are most aggressive about is just a really strong KYC policy, because once a bad actor gets into the network, it's really hard to get them out without them doing some damage. And so we have a very strong KYC policy. We also work with our customers on implementing strong KYC, because where we see most of the fraud coming into our networks is not our customers generating the calls, as somebody gets onto their network and maybe they don't have as strong of a KYC policy as they need. So that's one of the things we're really working with our customers on, is enhancing their KYC policies to keep them out of risk.
One thing I wanted to ask about is one of the big things that INCOMPAS is advocating on this year and will continue to, kind of like banging our head against the wall is trying to get the FCC to really sort of invest in IP interconnection, end-to-end IP interconnection, because it does so much in terms of stir shaken, rich call data, branded calling, so necessary to some of those things. Sinch has one of the most prominent sort of third-party transport solutions in the industry, and you work with a lot of big partners in order to provide IP interconnection. Wondering if you would talk a little bit about that, how those agreements are going, how you're helping providers interconnect, and why that's so important for robocall mitigation.
Yeah, so first off, why it's important is, and I'll give you an example. So I looked at our stats just the other day. Over 50% of the calls that we sign as stir shaken are from TDM connections. So they were most likely signed for at one point, and then it hits our network over TDM, and that connection or that signature is gone. And so we're re-signing those calls now all as Cs, which is what we're required to do. And so over half of the calls that we sign are because of TDM connectivity. So if those connections were all SIP-based, the stir shaken attestation would be flowing all the way through. So that's a huge issue when it comes to the analytics companies being able to take a call and see, okay, well, here's the originating number. We know information about that, but all of a sudden now it's a C. Why is it a C? And you don't know why it's a C. So that's a big problem. That and moving to SIP will help out dramatically. And then our work with the carriers has been critical. I mean, we're obviously the kind of the primary incoming provider to T-Mobile, AT&T, and several others, and we're working with all of them to get SIP connectivity throughout the ecosystem into their networks. I think the biggest issue is you have a legacy technology, and people that know how to work on TDM are retiring. I mean, it's that basic of an issue, is that people that know how to get rid of it have retired or are retiring, and it's costly and it's time consuming, and companies don't want to spend money on it. I mean, I think there needs to be some some regulation in pushing that to take place over the next several years.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's interesting. There's a couple of different options, right? You can do direct interconnect, which can be costly with transport costs. There's interconnection through the internet, which has its ups and downsides, and then third-party transport. And so, kudos to Sinch for the work that it's done, I think, to be that third-party transport for so many providers.
And one of the things that we've done is we've actually taken our networks and kind of split them out between private direct connections and public connections, because of the issues that you run into with DDoS attacks. I mean, there were several DDoS attacks years ago that impacted the industry, and so we've since separated out our network so that we don't have those types of issues, because again, we connect all of the largest carriers with billions of minutes a month, and so we need to make sure that those minutes go through every time.
Yeah, add one piece to double down on what he's saying here, because we produce a robocall report every quarter, and what we've been seeing in the carriers that we support, right? So we do support for the top 7 carriers in the U.S., period, by subscriber count, but also very small carriers and very large and medium, et cetera. One of the things we've seen is if you're one of these top carriers, you have 85% or plus of your traffic getting signed, and as you said, the stir shaking going from start to end. We see probably in the range of about 40 to 50% of the customers that I'm doing call guarding services for and signing it as an authentication service, that signature never gets to the tail end of the call, because of these TDM connections and this issue with the conversion of signaling and that network and build out an extension of IP connectivity. So it's been an issue that we're 100% behind trying to fix and trying to find resolutions to.
Yeah. Anna, you've been so patient.
Yeah, apologies.
We've come.
Well, Microsoft has been mentioned as a telemarketer, so
Yes.
yeah.
We've come to the moment where it's time to talk about how do we implement AI into our mitigation efforts. And obviously, Microsoft, is one of the premier developers in the world of AI technologies. You've spent a lot of resources and time in thinking about and working on products intended to mitigate the threat of fraudulent calls to consumers. So how is Microsoft thinking about the AI revolution's impact on FCC and industry efforts to eliminate illegal robocalls?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're trying to really emphasize the potential benefits of AI. We fully recognize that there are potential harms that we need to protect against, but there's also a vast amount of hugely beneficial solutions that can be brought about by AI. One example is a technology that Microsoft is developing that could apply AI over live voice calls strictly for the purposes of detecting scams and fraudulent calls. And so it would be enabled by the user. The recipient of the call would choose whether or not to apply this. It wouldn't be just pure surveillance. And the AI would analyze the call live, and if it detected indicia of fraud, it would interrupt the call, say, hey, because of these reasons, it sounds like this might be scam. Do you want to return the call, or should we send it to your voicemail so that you can listen to the voicemail, really see if this is something you want to respond to? And so it puts that decision in the hands of the user. We do see a lot of false negatives with respect to shaken authentication. My calls from my Microsoft phone number, when I call my own cell phone, get marked as likely spam. And so, and we control that, right? So it's really difficult to get that attestation in every circumstance, and it does deter people from answering. And so having a way to put that decision back in the user's hands is really advantageous. It's important that we talk about the guardrails that would be around that, because anytime you talk about AI listening to your voice calls, obviously people get very concerned about that. And so this solution would transcribe the live call solely for the purposes of analysis live during the conversation, and then drop it on the floor immediately after the call is over. That does lead you to the question of how do you train the AI model? These large language models are so advantageous because they're constantly learning, and they can pick up on discrete context. You cannot just give it simple indicia like, oh, this caller asked for the credit card information of the user, because there are plenty of legitimate use cases where a caller may ask you for your credit card information. And so how do we train it? There are publicly available recordings of fraudulent calls that we started out with training. There's the idea of honeypots that a lot of other solutions providers do, where you basically put out these phone numbers that fraudsters can easily pick up and then use that. And you're making the choice to record those calls, right? Or there's a path for getting consent from the user. Do you want to submit this as a report so that we can learn off of it? So it raises a lot of really interesting questions. And with respect to the FCC's action, what we're trying to really emphasize is, while we're protecting against the very legitimate potential harms that we fully acknowledge and want guardrails against as well, let's not remove the possibility for all of these really potentially beneficial solutions.
Yeah. And what have the discussions looked like with policymakers, decision makers about that, as you've tried to let them know that a lot of these solutions, can be done in compliance with wiretapping laws, things along those lines? How have those discussions gone, and what are some roadblocks maybe?
Yeah, I would slightly contest the premise of the question, because our position is that this is not necessarily surveillance or interception at all. We need more clarification around, does machine processing qualify as human surveillance if there's no human interaction? When we were speaking about this solution to regulators, as soon as we said it's only ever turned on if the recipient chooses to turn it on, that immediately you could feel shoulders drop. Adding on to the fact that we don't keep the recording of the call or even the transcript of the call, also, really alleviated a lot of concerns. But in any of the conversations that we have, we try to really ground it in the reality that algorithmic machine learning is nothing new. Mm-hmm. Large language models are new, and their ability to really understand context around conversations make them more accurate in that respect. But we have been filtering email spam for a long, long time, and the general public is really accepting of that being something that's crucial. Even in the EU, where there's a really, really heightened privacy regime, like the US does not compare. There's an understanding that email services couldn't operate if scanning for content wasn't done to filter for spam. So it's just about kind of level setting those things, and then also being really clear that we are committed to guardrails. We have commitments around responsible AI, and we've signed on to the White House's voluntary
to the
commitments
administration, yeah.
around AI, and we're really focused on making people comfortable with the fact that our AI solutions will be private and secure, will be transparent about what they do. We will limit their purpose and their use of any type of data to the purpose that that solution is designed for. Not only are these things the right thing to do, they're good for business. People will not adopt AI if they don't trust it. And there's a lot of public skepticism around AI right now. That's not shocking to anyone in the room. And so we want to be very upfront about what we're doing and putting those guardrails in place, and welcoming the guardrails, because it really will increase public trust.
Yeah. We've only got a couple minutes left. I want to give the other panelists an opportunity to talk about this, because clearly the FCC is interested.
Yeah.
They have an NPRM and an NOI on the use of AI technologies in mitigating illegal robocalls. I know we have two panelists that submitted comments. INCOMPAS submitted comments as well. Wanted to give Gerry and Nick an opportunity to weigh in on the use of AI in your mitigation efforts. And then, John and Anna, if you guys wanted to just talk a little bit about what your comments said and how you're responding to the commission, that would be great.
Sure. Well, first of all, sorry to say that Microsoft is a tough partner.
No.
That was totally
We're fully TICFA compliant.
Although we do see Microsoft impersonated frequently.
Yeah.
No big surprise there. So regarding the NPRM from the FCC, one of the big things that's at issue there is what is a AI-generated call. So I think that's going to be really important to see how that shakes out. And I asked the rhetorical question, what does the FCC really want to regulate? Do they want to regulate LLMs and machine learning, all that stuff? Do they want to regulate pre-recorded audio? There's already regulations there with the FTC. So anyway, we'll see how that shakes out. But I applaud the efforts of what Microsoft's doing, and I think kind of pivoting and making sure that it's opt-in only is really, really important. And I'm still a little confused how the LLMs are going to learn as good as they could if you were retaining it, but there's got to be a balance there. I'm a big advocate of a new form of digital identity, and I think there's value in this even without AI-generated call. And I think the way this could be used with deepfake recognition and things like that would be to have accountability, traceability, and non-repudiation back to whoever's taking responsibility for that call, whether it's AI-generated or not. And I think at some point we'll get there as an industry. I think there's actually good value with branded calling with this as well. Mm-hmm. So basically some way of, without doing a traceback, and what the ITG does at tracebacks is fantastic. But at the same time, if you could somehow know that there's a business entity that's taking responsibility for the call, and we can look at what they've done in the financial services arena with what's called an LEI, a legal entity identifier. Mm-hmm. And there's also something called a VLEI, which is a virtual LEI. It's a way of being able to digitally trace ownership, ideally cryptographically, so that you know who is responsible for that call. So I think those kind of things would have great complementary aspects with what Microsoft is doing and TNS and others as well.
Nick?
Yeah, so we heavily use AI in our messaging platforms because those systems can, those systems do read the emails or the messages and determine whether it's spam or fraudulent and block accordingly. So that's a much easier solution to deploy. The voice is much harder because it's much more heavily regulated, and there's a lot of concern over what happens, who's listening in on these things. And so, as Microsoft is heavily involved in that, we continue to look at how we can utilize AI on the voice side of the business to help actually stop a call in place, because right now it's all very reactionary. We utilize your data that has AI in it to stop calls, but it's typically there's a feedback loop. It takes a little while before you find them. You have to do something. It doesn't stop a call that's actually happening, a fraudulent call that's actually happening in real time. That's really where we'd like to get to.
Yeah. Anna, John, how did you all respond to the FCC?
Yeah, so we're largely supportive of what the FCC is doing, but again, it's around making sure that the guardrails that we put in place don't inadvertently impact these really beneficial solutions. I think one really good example that we highlighted was the ability for AI to be used for text-to-speech solutions. And the huge advantage of our new AI applications is that they sound really human-like. And it really is important for people with disabilities that are, struggle with speech or hard of hearing to be able to use those tools. And they also shouldn't have to reveal that they are using those tools. It could be used for discrimination against them, things like that. And so we asked the FCC to clarify that when using AI as an accessibility tool, that's not considered an AI-generated call that's subject to these heightened restrictions. Did ask the FCC to clarify around wiretap laws and whether it applies to AI, and really clarify that purely machine-based processing that's never revealed to a human without the consent of the user is not something that is prohibited under wiretap laws. It would really clarify things, especially at the state level, in states where there's two-party consent laws. And so we think that the FCC could really be helpful there in clearing up a lot of the fear in the industry around using solutions like this, and unlock that potential.
Yeah, and we found that we had to do a little bit of educating some of the consumer advocates as well about some of this, as we did some work in the FCC's Consumer Advisory Committee as well. So there's a lot to do, and clearly I'm excited to see Microsoft weigh in addition to us. John, I know TNS did as well.
Did it very similar, right? We defined it as two different segments, one in traffic origination and one in traffic termination. So with regard to termination, the use of AI and technologies is only going to grow and improve. So the ability to be using it to help protect the consumer, we think is a very viable use case. We should be able to expand and use it. And again, like you said, Anna, right? Following the right guardrails to make sure we're within scope of what we're looking at. But the origination side, this is again, as you referred to, of the text-to-speech, right? There's, maybe it's a daily care call on an elderly person, right? There's going to be, AI generation for other services and other proper candidates that we want to look into that is actually an enrichment of the service for the consumer that we would want to enable, right? So again, I think the guideline, the guidance that we have is that conceptually the FCC already has guidance around what is a good use case of if I physically dial someone and said this script versus this one, there's a differentiation of that experience. So why shouldn't that same logic be applied to an artificial generated call? I don't care that it was artificial. The fact is I want to follow the same paradigms and control about being truthful to the consumer and not to defraud, et cetera.
Yeah. Well, I wish we had more time. I really do. I've got a number of other questions, and I really would encourage you all to seek out our
That's
panel.
for Tampa next year now, right?
Panel, and you all are welcome back. This will be great, and we'll see where the FCC lands on AI and so many of these other things. I think this really shows that industry can guide a lot of those regulatory efforts with what you all are doing, and we'll be looking on with a lot of interest. So thank you all very much. Could you please join me in thanking our panelists?